From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Hello, welcome to another edition of the McLaughlin Group. Before I start, I want to thank Siraj Hashmi for so ably filling in for me for the last couple of weeks. He did a great job. And I have to apologize that you are back with my British accent. Anyway, our familiar faces this week are Eleanor Clift, Clarence Page, and Pat Buchanan. And our guest this week is A.B. Stoddard of Real Clear Politics. Welcome, A.B.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
Yeah. On that basis, we shall get to issue 1, campaign trail.
With less than 120 days until November 3rd's election day, President Trump and Joe Biden continue to galvanize their bases. Mr. Trump used a July 4th speech at Mount Rushmore to attack the political left who, he claims, are trying to rewrite the nation's history. Mr. Biden says he'll bring back manufacturing to ensure the nation is no longer reliant on China. And watch out, Kanye West also made waves this week. The rapper used a rambling interview with Forbes to pledge that he's running for president, assuming he can get on state ballots. Mr. West says he does not care if he siphons off votes from Mr. Biden.
Pat, how do you see the president's strategy? Obviously now, Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance is going to have access to the president's tax records, which the president, at least via Twitter, does not seem terribly happy about. But in this broader potpourri of the campaign trail, the president seems to be in growing trouble, is he not?
Well, that's undeniable, and I think the main reasons are the large issues. The coronavirus is spiking in Florida and Texas and Arizona. That's going to have an impact economically. It's been disheartening the country, which thought, quite frankly, because the deaths were diminishing, or at least the curve had been reached on them. So I think that Trump's had a rough week, but at the same time, Biden sort of been sheltering in place and on automatic pilot for his campaign. I think he still faces problems ahead with people's concerns about his intellectual capacity, with him moving too far to the left, with the fact that this war on the cops is now starting to backfire. And also, I think the battle really to bust down all these statues and the Cultural Revolution is too far outside the mainstream for Biden. And I think he has not figured out yet how to deal with it.
Eleanor.
I think Biden's figuring out how to deal with it. I think Trump's the one who's in trouble. He's trying to ramp up a culture war when the pandemic is out of control in states that he needs to win, Florida, Arizona, and even Texas. And he's also failed the leadership test on the civil rights movement of this generation, which rivals the one in the 60s, Pat, that you and I are familiar with. And the president wants to talk about Confederate statues. Oklahoma voted this last week, actually, to expand Medicaid. Missouri is going to do that also the first week in August. These are states that the president won in 2016.
A.B., your thoughts on how the president can right this ship? Obviously, there's a way to go till November, and Joe Biden, at moments on the trail, seems to be perhaps not as with it as he once was. Your thoughts on how the president can get back in the game?
I thought that when the pandemic engulfed us and we all had to lock down, it was an opportunity for President Trump, who's been erratic and selfish and at times unserious, at other times dangerous, to actually bring himself some political heft and build his credibility, be a serious leader, preside over a crisis in which he could prove that he was prepared for it and up to the task. Tell the truth, consistently message on the seriousness of this, as Eleanor points out, talk to people's fears about their health, and protect them. That's what the federal government is supposed to do. They are responsible for our collective security. They're not responsible for our financial stability or our happiness or our health.
Clarence, is one of the opportunities, though, perhaps for the president, if he takes on board at least some of A.B. and Eleanor's advice, but holds firm to the notion that we are not returning to a lockdown of the type that some Democrats are now calling for, even against the backdrop of those public health concerns because of that overriding economic factor? Is there a utility there, you think, that as we get towards November, enough Americans are going to say, you know what, when it comes to the margin, I'd rather have a functioning economy than a lockdown?
Well, there was a lot of utility in that. If the president had taken my advice back when I first gave it, which was quite a while back, you'll recall, I said healthcare is going to be the issue. This time it's going to be the make or break issue for Democrats, just as it helped them to win the House a couple of years ago. Now it has become the number one issue in so many ways, and ways that I wasn't expecting, because who expected the COVID-19 to come along? But it is a fact that not only is healthcare a critical issue now with so many American households, but President Trump proposes making it worse. He hasn't backed off an inch from wanting to repeal Obamacare. He has made it even more difficult for people to get care when they need it, and he has just really made the whole issue of testing and treatment more complex than it needed to be. And that's how he started out with, you remember, a nice approval rating bump when the pandemic first came along, and look what happened to that. And he now is at a point where not only is it too late for him to turn around by all indications, but he himself has no intention to turn around. He's digging in deeper, playing the xenophobia card.
I mean, a crucial turning point is coming up this fall. Clearly, ideologically, politically, temperamentally, and every other way, Trump is a doer, whatever you say about it. He wants the economy open. He's willing to take the risks. So he's got an awful lot on riding when something he does not control. And in his defense, I will say this. I mean, as of January and February, he was headed for a big victory. The virus hit, and maybe he didn't handle it all that well, but it was the virus and the attendant economic impact of it, and the fact that it is not going away, that it's a real problem for this president.
I didn't see him heading to a big victory in January or February either. He's lost suburban women. He's lost senior citizens. I mean, that all the erosion was happening in January and February before the pandemic. But what I wanted to say, Tom, is how do you define lockdown? You have the Texas governor, Abbott, who was adamant against masks, now making it mandatory for masks in Texas. These are Republican governors. The Republican governor of Ohio has made it mandatory in some counties where it's been run away. In Arizona, which is a swing state that now looks like it may very well elect a Democratic senator and go for Joe Biden, they've delayed the opening of schools, and they have people waiting in line in hot cars and stifling heat for 8 hours trying to get a test. You now have states that Trump has a stake in. I mean, I was suspicious before he was denying the states that weren't going to vote for him, but he's denying the states that he needs to win. And they're scrambling around trying to get testing materials. We're right back where we started. This didn't have to be that way. I mean, it's actually created speculation that he really doesn't want to win and he just wants to take us all down with him. I don't see him taking a big risk with his own health. He's very well cosseted.
AB, your colleague Phil Wegman this week in an interview with the president said he absolutely wants to win. But there is a point there, isn't there, that Eleanor makes, that if we look at certain cities, Washington, D.C., for example, where all of us are, the degree of a lockdown followed by a process of a lot of testing and caution and wearing masks, indoors, don't go into a place unless you're wearing a mask. DC is doing exceptionally well. I mean, is there the structural problem there that actually President Trump's approach to this was fatally flawed, and he's just going to keep reaping the whirlwind of that?
The problem is, Tom, that the president wanted to farm it out to the governors so that they would take the blame if their states didn't do well. States don't handle pandemics. They balance their own budgets. They do what they can to stay alive. The federal government is supposed to handle pandemic preparation and mitigation and protection. We all know what he did. He denied it for 70 days. He protected the president of China. We all know what he did. He didn't mass produce testing materials, and he did not mass produce masks with the DPA. There are so many things he refused to do. And then, of course, he went off message after just 2 months of a lockdown, basically anti-mask, and on. Lots of denial and magical thinking. The problem is, when you say Democrats are pro-lockdown, lockdowns were never supposed to be permanent. They were supposed to be temporary so that we could buy time to do the kinds of things to move this country forward.
All right, Clarence.
Well, I can see why people think that he doesn't really want to win. I mean, here right after the president insisted that his supporters come to a hot zone, Tulsa, Oklahoma, when it was turning into a hot zone for coronavirus, and then was shocked to see that fewer than a third of the capacity of the stadium showed up. First time that has happened during his political career. And now what does he want to do? He's telling American parents, you must bring your kids to school now. And he's forcing this on the states and saying he's going to threaten their school funding if they don't. I mean, this is not the way to win an election, in my view, or else he's just rewriting the whole book in front of our eyes.
Well, let's move on and consider that factor in greater detail. But I do think, it's worth noting that the halfway house here between, returning to full lockdown and taking precautions is some places DC. I mean, I give Mayor Bowser, I was very critical in the beginning. I think time has proven her approach to be quite apt. Anyway, issue 2, the fall factor.
President Trump this week advanced his call on schools to reopen in the fall. In a tweet, the president warned, quote, in Germany, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and many other countries, schools are open with no problems. The Democrats think it would be bad for them politically if schools open before the November election, but it is important for the children and families. May cut off funding if not open, end quote.
Eleanor, does President Trump have any practical ability to do what he's threatening to do and withhold federal funding in order to see schools across the nation reopen? And does it make any political sense?
No, it's a totally empty threat. And it's also a lie that it's Democrats only who are worried about opening schools because they want him to look bad. It's Republicans as well. I just pointed out in Arizona, they've now delayed the opening. That's a Republican governor, and it's a state he actually needs to win. I'm all for opening the schools. When the president said earlier this week, we need to open the schools, the children have to go back to learning. They need it for their mental health, their stability. They need their school lunches. I'm for all of that. But the next half of the sentence is, and the federal government will do everything to make it possible for this to happen safely. Instead, the president squelches the CDC guidelines on the opening, says they're too complicated and too prescriptive, and is making the CDC water down the guidelines. And then he adds an extra dose of cruelty by saying foreign students who are in the country attending universities, if they're only going to be learning online, they're going to be deported. Hampshire College in Massachusetts, which is in a rural setting, has offered to house foreign students who were threatened with deportation. And of course, 3 states in the Northeast have also gone to court to sue the administration over that. So he's just lashing out. And, it's very stressful for parents, for teachers, for the support personnel in schools. Everybody wants this to happen, but we don't want our schools to become like cruise ships, petri dishes to spread the virus. And the president saying 99% of the cases are harmless, it's another lie. So he's going to get a lot of pushback on this.
Pat, is one of the perhaps sort of opportunities for the president, if he were to change some of the tenor and aggression with which he's putting forward his way or the highway, that there are a lot of parents who desperately need to be back in work and could be in work, but if their children can't go back to school, they can't go back to work. So that economic idea of giving parents choice, do you think there's any utility to that?
Listen, I do think, all the parents would like the kids to go back to school as soon as possible and as safely as possible. And I think the country wants to go back to work. But the problem is that there are risks attendant to this. I don't know what would happen when you go back. If you go back to some school, 45 kids come down with the virus, then you're going to have the school shut down. And despite the fact, I realize this is not a rally for Donald Trump, it is not Donald Trump's fault that this is what the coronavirus is doing. Maybe he could have handled it better, but there's no doubt about it that this is a roll of the dice. I don't know whoever takes it. Secondly, I disagree with AB to this extent. The governors are very powerful in these matters, in what opens up and what doesn't open up, in what schools are shut down, and whether they say that's it for this school district. And upon all these decisions rests the re-election of Donald Trump. And so I have some sympathy for the guy, which is not widely shared on this panel.
Okay, Clarence, your thoughts?
Well, I think that the president has. Pat, I don't know why you think that there's not some sympathy for President Trump on this panel, but I think I sympathize with President Trump's position on education early on, because he sounded like he was really interested in it. But when he makes moves like wanting to cut off foreign students who are learning online, does he know anything about the revenue that foreign students bring into our educational system and our college educational system? They pay full ride. They aren't scholarship kids or anything like that. And many of them stay here and contribute very meaningfully to our science and technology and various other industries. They're a mechanism of economic growth, but he's got such a myopic view on immigration, I guess inspired by his aide Stephen Miller, that he doesn't see that. He just sees foreigners, and we got to get as few of them as possible. And it's the same thing with the rest of this issue in regard to the schools. This is not the way to win friends with parents or anybody else who appreciates education.
Okay, AB, your thoughts?
Well, I want to go back to what Pat said. I was actually saying the president doesn't have the power to voice these decisions about opening schools up on the states. And he's trying to impose this pressure from the federal government, but he does not have that power. The governors don't have the power to create national stockpiles and to prepare us for pandemics and to make sure that companies are mass producing under the Defense Production Act things that we need immediately in abundance. And so the president's failures at the federal level are well documented. And we are looking at mass death and a policy in July that is without a plan to control the spread of the coronavirus. This is something that could have been in place in early February when he knew about it, but he chose not to. So our policy is acceptable levels of infection and death. This is unacceptable to the majority of the voters, which is why you see them turning against the president, even members of his own coalition. So yeah, the governors can make these decisions now about school, whether under enormous political pressure from the president, but he can't force them to make the decisions that he wants. Okay. But what he did in the spring and early summer, when we needed to not squander this time, was basically let them handle this on their own. And it is true, every single state opened up without reaching the benchmarks the federal government provided. Fewer cases, less stress on the hospitals, everything that the government said we needed to do to open up. They all skipped those and went ahead, again, under a lot of political pressure. Also, what they saw from this White House was an undermining of the public health message and those guidelines. All right,
well, we'll move on to another issue, which is very important this week in the campaign trail. Issue 3, MOUT.
MOUT is the US military acronym for Military Operations in Urban Terrain. Looking at the violent crime rippling across major cities, MOUT might just be a good descriptor for what police forces are facing. Coming off weeks of riots, protests, and the removal of statues across the nation, urban crime is soaring. In New York City, police figures show the first 6 months of 2020 with a murder rate rise of 23% and shootings up 51% year on year. In Chicago, 90 people were shot over the holiday weekend, including the fatal killing of a 7-year-old girl. And in Georgia, Governor Brian Kemp declared a state of emergency and activated as many as 1,000 National Guardsmen.
Clarence, might this be the last remaining or the best arrow still in the president's electoral quiver, in the sense that Democrats have made quite a clear ideological press now, at least for police defundment? But the president standing firm on this law and order mentality, as this crime increases, the idea of public safety, we talk about that in coronavirus, could the president be able to use this as his issue, that he's the guy for law and order?
Well, first of all, it's important to note that former Vice President Biden has been opposed to this whole notion of not just defunding police, but abolishing the police, all of that. He does believe that indeed social services are important in order to support remove a lot of the roots of this crime surge. But he's not a defund the police guy, and even Trump's ads recognize that. They say supporters of President Biden want to defund the police, and the fact is that charge just has not stuck to Joe Biden. He is everybody knows him as the practical, middle of the road, good old Joe. He may be dull, but he's not calling for any radical ideas like that. The problem is that President Trump only has one solution to any crime problem, and that is more police, law and order, more violence. And we have seen that that kind of approach is counterproductive in so many cases. It's really driven a lot of urban residents to say we need to defund the police. We need to try some alternative. We need to reimagine policing. And in some cities like Camden, New Jersey, and some others around the country to varying degrees, Minneapolis, they are directing more funds toward social services because we're asking the cops to do too much.
What is going on now, quite frankly, is a tragedy and a horrible situation. We watch people shot on the streets of these cities. They're all Democratic-controlled cities. All these mayors have failed, and now we got the idiots and absurd people of BLM, and the rest of it are saying abolish the police or defund the police or dismantle the police. This is eventually going to benefit Trump, and it's horrible for the nation. And the truth is, everybody knows that has any experience in life, that the cops are vital to the security and safety of the people in the city, especially the people most endangered and imperiled. Okay. And the idea of abolishing the cops is just ridiculous. And if Biden's best bet is to stay away from BLM on this one.
Okay, very tight on time, Eleanor. You.
Biden does not support defunding the police. He does support more social services, but black on black crime is nothing new. It's been with us for a long time, and frankly, politicians tolerated it because they figured let them kill each other is fine as long as they don't kill us. I mean, I think that was the cynical bargain. And what's happening in cities is a legacy of 400 years of neglect and poverty that we need to do a better job remedying. But it's also because, just like white on white crime, more whites kill whites, because the killings happen in communities where you live and among people who you know. So I don't think we need to treat this like some social pathology that we can't understand. I mean, we know why it's happening. We know what needs to be done about it, and using the kind of language and race baiting that the president uses is not a solution. I think we are going to get a change of administration and change in the Congress, and the Black Lives Matters movement is an historic event to begin the 21st century.
Okay, AB, very quick. Sorry, we ran out of time.
I think that the challenge to Vice President Biden, particularly as he chooses a vice presidential running mate, is to not flirt with the illiberalism of the left, and that to know the difference between a whole bunch of voters, some Republicans and many independents, who are now making that shift in the polling, seeing, acknowledging there's police brutality, and that the police need to rebuild social trust, but not interested in police retiring in droves, more community services replacing police departments, canceling the 4th of July, or knocking down statues without a process in lawless mobs. So it is an issue for the president. He tends to overdo things and not do things very deftly, but it is a challenge to Vice President Biden as he goes forward when he picks a running mate and the rhetoric gets more heated closer to November.
Oh, okay. My 2 cents, I just think that one of the challenges we face here is that police officers are understandably refusing to patrol in areas where they don't believe politicians will support them. And secondly, I do think there is a challenge in the Black community. As much as there is poverty, there is also the issue of collapsed families and an absence of personal responsibility by some people. But anyway, we'll move on to predictions. Pat.
Tom Friedman of the New York Times said that Joe Biden should avoid a debate with the debates with the president, and he had a couple of good excuses for him to how he's going to do it. I think that's absurd, but the idea is, I think the wish is father to the thought in the Democratic Party, and I would not be surprised to learn that Biden's staffers are trying to figure out how exactly he can either reduce the numbers of debates or end them altogether.
All right, Eleanor.
Sorry, Pat. The Biden campaign has already signed off on 3 debates and the locales where they will take place. So dream on. My prediction is that the rift between the public health experts and the president will get worse. It'll probably be an open break with Dr. Fauci, who has been pretty clear about how we're heading into what looks like Armageddon here if we don't get control of the virus in these states where it is now spiraling out of control.
AB.
If I don't see you guys again, I'm just going to go with my huge prediction on the Senate majority. I think, looking at the fact that Republicans are defending 23 seats, but are very, very, very worried about 12 of them, and having to spend enormous sums on 12 of them means that they are not going to be able to hold their majority, which would mean 4 if Biden wins, only 4 losses that they could suffer, 3 if the president keeps his job. So I think that there's a good chance Democrats can pick up 4 on November 3rd. Okay,
Clarence.
Well, usually Pat guesses my prediction before I say it. This time AB did.
So, I'm sorry, Clarence.
That's all right. I can't help being last, but nevertheless, at least I feel more brave now in saying that I think Republicans are going to lose the Senate. You're right. That's a giant prediction, but it's getting more credible every day.
Okay. Very short on time, so I'll simply say I predict that AB will be back if she wishes to be back before November. Thank you.
I hope so.